Why are people buying the PSA Micro Dagger? Essentially, I think it's the same thing but cheaper as a Glock 43X MOS. Today we're gonna figure out why people are buying this, and at the end, I'll tell you which one I prefer. So what is the PSA Micro Dagger? This is a sub-compact handgun from Palmetto State Armory that is based off of a Gen 5 Glock 43X MOS. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. I don't know if that's exactly what they were going for, but this gun shares a lot of the same internal components as the 43X MOS. It even uses the same exact magazines. And the reason we say it's similar to the Glock 43X MOS is because the MOS system has a light rail and an optic system. With it being this similar to a 43X MOS, you're probably asking yourself, what actually is the difference? PSA is known for having really good pricing, and that's a big element of this gun, is it's $145 cheaper than the 43X MOS, and in my opinion, it has a little bit better ergonomics. Once you guys have watched this video all the way through, I'm really curious to see which one you'd prefer, so drop a comment down below, Glock 43X MOS or PSA Micro Dagger. Those of you with a really keen eye probably noticed there's a compensator on here. This is a brand new compensator from Herrington Arms. We're gonna deep dive into the specs later. However, as you're watching this video, this is a new product that just came out from us, very limited quantities. So if you guys are interested in this compensator, go ahead and check out harringtonarms.com. We might be out of stock. There are very limited quantities, so you better act fast. So jumping into the PSA Micro Dagger, top to bottom, this is a 3.4-inch stock barrel. Obviously, we have a Glock 43X threaded barrel in there to run the compensator. You're gonna see this to be a common trend along the entire video. You can use Glock 43X components in here in a lot of different places. Not all places, but a lot of these components are based off of a Glock 43X and will work in the Micro Dagger. Sitting on top, we have a Holosun 407K. This uses the RMSC cut, which is a much better mounting solution, being a direct milled slide than the Glock 43X MOS. This is one of the pros of the Micro Dagger. Sits a little deeper, has more thread engagement, and it's cut for a very common optic. Another big pro of the Micro Dagger, if you're not gonna throw an optic on here, you actually do get some nice 3-dot steel iron sights. In my opinion, they're also better than the 43X MOS. Moving our way down the slide, I really like the cuts on the slide. I think it looks really good. Looks a lot sharper than the 43X. And the slide serrations are just gonna be a little more aggressive. The forward cant helps a lot, more than I actually thought it would when you perform press checks. I think it bites into your hand a little bit more. These slide serrations are actually about the same size. There are just more of them and they're at a forward cant. Glock actually puts a chamfer on their slide serrations, so it's not gonna bite as much as the Micro Dagger. I think the fact that they're not deburred and they're at a forward cant helps quite a bit, and it's actually very noticeable when you manipulate this handgun. As we already alluded to in the intro, we have a new compensator called the HCMDG, bunch of letters. However, this compensator works really good. We spent a lot of time refining this compensator, both with the fins and the port size. With the port geometry, we play with side ports, one small top port, 2 ports. What we landed on was essentially one large port. It really helps tame this gun. I would say it actually performs a little bit better than the Glock 43X when you're shooting. A lot of that isn't just the compensator. I think the ergonomics are better and allow you to get a much better grip on this very small handgun, which is gonna aid in recoil. Moving our way down, in between the slide and the frame, we come to the slide release. This slide release has a little bit of a bump out on it over the stock Glock 43X. You can see with the Glock 43X, it is very flat up against that slide, which makes it a little bit harder to press. Over the Micro Dagger, this bumped edge just gives you a little bit more to push down on and ultimately send that slide home a little bit faster on a reload. This is really small, but we found that it actually does help quite a bit. Moving our way into the frame, we're actually gonna start with the ergonomics of this handgun. I think it is superior to the 43X MOS. The 43X feels very small, very rectangular. I think PSA did a little bit better of a job with this. It feels more rounded. It kind of fits to the form factor of your hand. And when you actually grip the handgun, you just feel like there's more surface contact. And ultimately, when you form that grip on the handgun, it's gonna feel a little bit bigger. When you look at both guns side by side, they look the same, but the PSA Micro Dagger definitely has a little bit better ergonomics in my opinion. Kind of on that same note, I think grip texture is virtually obsolete on the Micro Dagger. It's definitely not great on the 43X MOS either, or really any of the subcompact Glock models. But I feel like for a carry gun, this is just way too soft. They could have stepped it up a little bit, and this gun would have been kind of running circles around the original Glock 43X MOS. One of the things I don't like about the ergonomics with this gun is it's just small, and ultimately you really can't get around that. It's based on the 43X. The size works for a lot of people. I think it's a really good sized handgun, but if you want to shoot fast, you want to control recoil, it just feels a little bit small. So it's obviously a limiting factor. You can't really do much competition shooting with this. It's not that fun to shoot compared to a larger handgun. So you're just kind of limiting it to a concealed carry handgun. As I already mentioned, this does have a light rail. It is cut just like the 43X MOS. And because of that, you can actually run holsters. Here we have a tier 1 concealed Glock 43X MOS holster. You can hear it clicks in really nice. Really good retention. Draws exactly the same as the 43X MOS. Obviously, this is a sample size of 1. It's just tier 1. However, I found that their quality seems to be really good and it's very tight, especially when you compare it to some of the other holsters on the market. So if it fits a tier 1 concealed, it'll probably fit a lot of other things. So take that for what you will. Definitely reach out to a manufacturer if you're considering a T-Rex Arms or really any other brand on the market. Just know it does fit this tier 1 concealed. So now we got to talk about the thing I hate the most about this handgun, and that is going to be the trigger. This is probably the worst feeling trigger I've ever felt in a striker fired handgun, and that's probably not an exaggeration. There's a lot of really bad triggers out there, but let me walk you through where my head is at on this trigger. Right off the bat, you can see there's a lot of take up, and there's another level of motion here. This has a very similar trigger to like an FN or a first gen Smith & Wesson. And when you already have one layer of rotation or movement in a trigger, adding a hinge or another layer of movement just makes it have a really weird trigger pull. I'm not sure why PSA did this. I think if you're looking at it from a safety standpoint, it's also not the best. If you put this in a leather holster and it grabs the bottom, it can grab the entire trigger and bypass and go off. So it's not safe. It's not good. I just don't know why they chose to do this system. However, that's not where the bad stops. This trigger has a rolling brake that is rather stiff and kind of spongy, so that's not great, but the reset is good. So at least you get one good thing on this trigger. But dry firing this gun and shooting it in real life, I feel like there's a separation there. You can dry fire a lot of triggers and be like, wow, this is not great, and then go to the range and not really notice it. When we went to the range, we still kind of noticed how bad this trigger is, especially at distance. When you present and you go to pull the trigger and you're trying to be accurate, it's just really hard to have those very tight groupings at 15, 20 yards. Shooting the Glock 43X at distance, there's a solid wall, which allows you to prep that trigger, and you really can't do that with the Micro Dagger. So this is probably the worst part of the Micro Dagger, and it is a fixable issue. You can throw in an aftermarket 43X trigger. Not a lot of people are doing it, so I'm not sure what the compatibility is. Just know that this does use Glock 43X components, and if you really don't like the trigger shoe, you can probably fix it. However, if we move further down the frame, we're gonna get to the mag release. I actually like this mag release quite a lot. I think the geometry is better than a 43X MOS or really any Glock mag release. Has this really nice rounded edge here, which feels really good when you perform a reload. The spring isn't too heavy. And one of the things I really like that PSA did is they opted to throw plastic on the front of this steel magazine. One of the things about the Shield mags is it's steel all the way around, and you have to put in a steel mag release. With the PSA, you can get away with doing that because it's plastic on plastic, so it's gonna feel pretty refined. I'm actually surprised they did this. This is incredibly close to the Shield Arms mag, and there's definitely got to be some conflict of interest there, but I'm going to stay out of it. However, I really like the system. I think the mag release is pretty good. I think the mag it comes with is pretty good. I wish PSA would give you 2 mags with the gun instead of just 1, but to each their own. On that, the price is pretty cheap, so I kind of get it. With the mag coming from PSA, it is 15 rounds as well, and the Shield Arms mags will work in it. Obviously, you got to be careful because it is a steel mag on a plastic mag release, and the OEM 10-round Glock 43X mags will also work. So that's kind of a cool little feature they threw in here. This gun is incredibly close to a 43X MOS, so it kind of makes sense. And on this 10-round Glock magazine, we have a +2 extension. This is actually a product that will be coming out soon from Herrington Arms. Works on the OEM Glock 43X magazines. If you guys are interested in this and the release date, check out our Instagram. That's kind of where we have the most direct line of communication with you guys, and we post a lot of updates about new products. If you guys do run a lot of Shield Arms mags in your Micro Dagger, just know that you're gonna have to replace this mag release with the steel one that comes from Shield Arms. So last but not least on the actual gun itself is gonna be the Magwell. This Magwell is not good. It's actually not even really a Magwell. The front has a nice little chamfer on it, and you kind of get excited thinking it's gonna be a good Magwell, and then you look at the sides and there's nothing. Me and Jake both butched a couple reloads with this handgun. That's just kind of a training thing and getting used to this size handgun and performing reloads. The back of the frame looks pretty good. I would have loved to seen that they fill this hole with plastic and add a big chamfer here, but I don't think it's as bad as the Glock with the big U-notch cut. So I would say this is 50% of the way there to a Magwell. They only had to do a couple little things better, and I think this would have been pretty decent. And you really wouldn't have had to add a whole lot of width here to make an integrated Magwell. Herrington Arms is actually working on a Magwell solution for this, so if you're interested in the future, check out Herrington Arms. We might have the Magwell out for this. Running this with a Magwell makes a huge difference. Doing all the R&D testing on it, I noticed a huge difference. So if you guys are interested, be on the lookout for that. Should be coming out in the next couple months. So with all that being said about this handgun, what are you gonna pay? We found this gun going for a lot of different prices on PSA site. There's a lot of color options, there's porting. Generally, this gun goes for about $340. That is kind of a steal. It is $145 cheaper than the $485 stock Glock 43X MOS, and it uses a lot of the same components, and it does some things better. So I think for that sub $400 price range, this ultimately is a pretty good handgun. I think it has a lot of pros over the 43X. So now you guys know about all the specs of this gun, and Jake's gonna come on and talk about what it's like shooting this gun from a professional background. Then I'll come back on and tell you guys who this gun is for.
Right off the rip, the first thing I noticed as soon as I picked it up is I was like, this grip is definitely a little bit bigger than a 43X or 48. From back to front, so basically back of the beaver tail here to the trigger, a little bit longer, which is good, especially with somebody with bigger hands. And then also in width or girth, it is most certainly wider. And I noticed this right off the rip because the first, as you guys have watched our 43X videos or any other like micro subcompact videos we've done, I just get ate up by any of these smaller guns. And because this has that nice beaver tail on the back, it still got me a little bit. There's definitely still blood on this gun, but it was very much minimalized. So big, huge fan of that. PSA knocked it out of the park in that regard. Big fan that it comes milled from the factory so you can direct mount optics. You don't have to buy another plate for $60 or $80. You can just direct mount your optic to the slide. Huge fan of that. It's also very deep cut. So you can keep the iron sights that are already on the pistol. You don't have to go and buy another suppressor height sights for this gun. It's ready to go out of the box, as long as you have your optic, obviously. There's some serrations here as well, but I don't really know if those stick out per se different than anything from the 43X. Serrations are serrations. These are both deeply cut. Good job on their part. Nothing mind-blowing there. Now, bumping back to the frame real quick, you guys will notice too, there is a very high undercut here. Big thumbs up, especially for people with big hands. You guys will notice with the Glock, the undercut is not nearly as steep as it is with this PSA Micro Dagger. Big fan of this. I noticed it immediately, especially when picking up the pistol, plus the ergonomics or the comfortability of the beaver tail combined with this undercut. Big fan, big thumbs up there. I'm really a huge fan of this, mostly because it helps you achieve a higher leverage grip. I like to run my hands and my thumbs as high as I can up on a pistol just to get as much leverage and friction as I can over the gun. And this undercut and this extended beaver tail allow me to do that without getting cut up or without my hands, or at least my firing hand, falling off the gun. I also appreciate the fact that they attempted some stippling or some sort of serrations here. It's not just like a slick black plastic bottom there with maybe some bumps on it. They actually made an effort to put to stipple or serrate this. You can actually tell it's doing its job because there's a lot of dead skin on this. So in my eyes, in that regards, it's definitely working. So another big thumbs up with the PSA Micro Dagger is the slide release. I know this sounds like a really funny thing to say, but as a lefty, I have to drop the slide with my index finger. This is how I choose to do reloads. I don't like coming over the slide and hitting it back and letting it go forward. Not a big fan of that. The reason why, or if we go over to a Glock, and this is like this generally across all platforms of Glock, you guys will notice that the slide release is sucked up really tight against the slide and frame, and it has a very slick coating on it. It is serrated, but because the coating is so slick, you would never know this thing is serrated. Now with the PSA Micro Dagger, they push the slide release out a little bit from the frame and a little bit from the slide, obviously. And there's more of a shelf for a finger or thumb to grab. And the serration, because the coating is not slick, the serration's actually useful on it. Also on the bottom of the frame here, you guys will notice there's a tiny little lip at the bottom. And the Glock barely has one of these as well. That lip kind of smushes your grip up against the undercut of the trigger well. Just makes it feel like an overall better firing grip. It's just one of those little details that adds to some comfortability, and I appreciate that. Now, for those of you that remember the original iterations of the micro compacts that Glock released, the huge fatal flaw they missed marketing-wise and design-wise was they never released it with a rail on the front. The first ones of these to come out were just slick. They were sheerly designed to be concealed carry guns, nothing else. And then finally they released the X and the 48 MOS. If I'm not mistaken, the 48 MOS was the first one to come optics ready and light bearing ready. They fixed that coming out with the 43X series and so on. PSA immediately did this from the get-go, didn't do any iterations after, no Gen 2 or V2. Did it correctly from the start, Have to appreciate that. Again, giant thumbs up in regards to that. Now we're getting to my one beef with this platform, and that's the trigger. I know Corey kind of hammered on the trigger, so I'm gonna take it a little bit easy and not dunk on it too hard here. It basically feels like a smoother striker fire double action trigger. Not a huge fan of that at all. The problem is there's no wall in this. So if I just pull this trigger, there's at no point is the gun mechanically stopping me. I'm just pulling and pulling and pulling until it goes off. You have to go based off training and experience, and that's totally fine. I will say, like, ripping on a trigger in a gun in general is something that is experienced and training based. It can always be fixed with more experience. It can always be fixed with more training. So I don't want to rip on this too hard, because if I just got enough range sessions in with this gun, put enough ammo through it, put some time and dedication into learning this platform, sure, it wouldn't be a problem. But with my experience across hundreds of other platforms that I shot, this is something that stuck out to me like immediately. And then also one more thing with the trigger, length of pull. And I will say this before I get into this too deep here. We're talking about like a micro compact or just a compact gun. So length of pull, trigger issues, like most of them across the board do not have good triggers. They have, for the most part, garbage length of pull, and that's fine, okay? But for those of you that are going to invest in this, and you have to understand that that's what you're getting into with a platform like this. So your length of pull, especially once you get back here, it feels kind of strange. I have a hard time breaking from a single joint in the trigger like I want to. I feel like my hand naturally wants to take more over pulling the trigger than just a single isolated joint or just my trigger finger. For those of you that have ever heard the term shooting low and left or shooting low and right, it has a lot to do with your grip pressures, okay? And typically people are pulling the trigger with their whole hand versus an isolated single joint, and that's why we see Glocks, let's just use them as an example. People, especially newer shooters, always shooting low and left if they're right-handed, or low and right if they're left-handed. And I also was not a fan of the fact that this is hinged, because every time I kept pulling the trigger, especially in these longer strings of fire that you guys are seeing, we got this gun super hot, and their only way to do that is by shooting it a lot, right? So I noticed, especially in longer strings of fire, 5 rounds and up, my finger kept sliding down on this trigger and rubbing up against the bottom of the frame. Now granted, I am used to shooting full-size platforms, but I did notice that immediately, because some of my skin in my finger was getting caught with the bottom of the trigger guard and the trigger. It just kind of got annoying over time. Is it something that's like life or death? No, it's not. I don't think this is designed to be like a gun. You go to the range, you get a 1,000-round range day in. You know, it's something to be aware of, especially if it's going to be your main squeeze or carry piece. So now we're going to get into the shootability, repeatability, etc. of this gun. Because we shot this gun with a comp on it the whole time, I feel like it kind of enhanced the repeatability of it. I noticed, and again, I can't really put my finger on this, but with the 43 platform, or just like the subcompacts that Glock's making, even with our comp on it, is it repeatable? Absolutely. But not in the 12-6 manner that the Dagger compact was. And I don't really know what the reason was, or exactly, I can't put my finger on it, but it's just something I felt. Maybe it has something to do with the higher undercut underneath the trigger guard and the beaver tail, but it's something I noticed relatively immediately, especially when we were doing the higher strings of fire. We shot some spicy ammo through this, and then some not so spicy ammo through it. We shot AAC 124 through this. That stuff's, I don't know if loaded hot is the right term, but it was definitely loaded hotter than Black Sheep 124. With the AAC, if we're talking about dot in relation to the optic window, left the optic every single time, okay? And again, that's not the end of the world. You know, your grip and your fundamentals have a lot more to do with the repeatability of the gun than the actual mechanics and structure of it. But something I noticed immediately, when we switched over to Black Sheep 124, it's loaded a little bit softer, and the entire time, that dot never left the optic window. Now, like, getting into the 3 pillars, right? Grip, sights, and trigger. Grip. You guys know I'm a stickler for grip, okay? On these smaller guns, a guy with bigger hands, always gonna run into issues. There's just no getting around this. So I'm not gonna try to be unfair when I say this, but the firing hand grip, very comfortable. As I said before when I was talking about the frame, noticed it immediately. So if I build my firing hand grip, you guys can see already, there's just not much to go off of here, okay? So really the only thing on my non-dominant hand connecting with the gun at all is the drumstick of my thumb, and that's that portion right here, commonly referred to as the drumstick of the thumb, okay? When I build that firing hand grip, wrap and roll, and build it in, all I have is contact on the top of the gun. Everything else is grip built on my other hand, and that doesn't really wield well for recoil control, recoil management, like overall shootability of the gun. Especially in longer strings of fire, I notice my offhands slipping off the gun a lot. Okay, did you just relate that back to sweaty hands? Sure, but even on a full-size platform, it's not something I notice immediately. But on this, definitely, 100% did. With this gun, anything past 10 yards, was a serious challenge. Even stuff like 7 to 10 yards required more confirmation on my end. I had to give the trigger more tender loving care because it doesn't obviously feel as good as I mentioned before, like a Glock or Smith & Wesson or a 2011 trigger. It requires more skillful manipulation on the end of the shooter, and that's totally fine. Most of the beefs I have with this gun 100% relate back to a skill issue. Okay, and we only had about 400, 500 rounds in this gun. So in terms of building skill, there really wasn't room for much. This might come as a shocker to some of you. I would 100% buy this over a 43X or a 48. I feel like this has more positives than negatives and the Glock equivalent to it. And you guys know I'm kind of a Glock fanboy, so I'm betraying my own kind here. But for what this comes with out of the box and the price point that it's at, I mean, it's really hard to beat. There's tons of crossovers, whether it's the barrel, trigger, optic mounting system, sights, whatever it is, or iron sights, what I mean by that. So overall, I'd give it probably about an 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed shooting this gun. I also really enjoyed the fact that it was a smaller gun that I could shoot at a higher round count rate, quickly and accurately and repeatably. It's stuff like that sticks out big time, especially when I pick up a gun like this and put 400 or 500 rounds through it and don't have the same results.
So with all that being said, who is the PSA Micro Dagger for? I think it's for the person that wants to save some money over a Glock 43X, obviously, but also wants maybe something with a little bit better ergonomics and even native support for a 15-round stock magazine. It's really nice that PSA offers this. I think they did a really nice take on this. And honestly, it's about time that Glock increases their capacity and goes away from those plastic magazines, steps it up, switches to a 15-round metal magazine. But thankfully, there's aftermarket support and now PSA offering these magazines. It's just really nice that it comes with the gun and it has this polymer front so that you don't have to change out your mag release. This gun is really good for the price. It has a lot of pros to it, and I think a lot of people are gonna find value in that. If you guys like this video, we'd appreciate a like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.